Hello everybody, welcome back to another episode of Access Blockbusters Pod. I hope you are having a wonderful day here as we are diving into another week of movie news, television news, pop culture news, all of the amazing things that have been going on in the world of entertainment as it pertains to blockbusters, but not just blockbusters, films and entertainment in general, and television shows as well. So thank you guys so much for joining us on today's episode. First of all, I just want to say thank you guys so much for supporting last week's episode 36, which I had mentioned a couple weeks ago was going to be a little bit different because we were going to be embarking on our DCE rewatch series. Now, for those of you who haven't been following the channel, so essentially I'm going to be returning to the podcast format for the foreseeable future, which means that I'm going to be trying to post weekly podcasts on the weekends and then post the clips throughout the week as I have been doing for the last month or so. That being said, I will not be able to always post and record podcast episodes every single week, and so what that means is that I'll have because I want to maintain my content for you guys so that you can have something to listen to every single week. I am going to try to post a podcast episode every week, and that means that I have a new series coming out in the weeks that I will not be able to post a podcast episode. And so I had mentioned a few weeks ago that this was going to be the DCE rewatch series, and we started out last week with Man of Steel. So I just, again, thank you so much for all of the support on that podcast episode. Really just enjoyed sharing my thoughts and hearing what you guys had to say about Man of Steel. Make sure to check out the episode if you're interested at all. And obviously we're going in release order. And so the next one will be Batman v Superman. I did watch the Ultimate Edition. I'm pretty far into the DCE rewatch, maybe about halfway or so, I'd like to say, and I'm just working on getting those podcasts ready and, so that they can come out in a timely manner. So I'm hoping to have maybe one of those a month or so, maybe one every other month or something like that, maybe one every 6 weeks, and just sort of, diversifying what's on the channel just a little bit. But for the most part, we're going to be sticking to the format that we've been doing for the past little while here, which is just weekly podcast episodes, catching up on what's been going on. If I've watched anything recently that's new, that's been coming out, just working with that, talking about that. But for the time being, just sticking with the format of, releasing these weekly podcasts with the news and then the DCE rewatch podcasts in between. So look forward to Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice, the Ultimate Edition rewatch podcast episode. But for the time being, guys, we are here to talk about a lot of different things, a lot of very interesting things that have been coming out over the last week or so. So first, if you haven't subscribed to the Access Blockbusters YouTube channel, if that is where you are listening or watching the podcast, make sure to do so. Give the video a like and let me know in the comments down below what you think about the topics we discussed today. There's a whole range of things that I wanted to discuss, including mostly Marvel and Star Wars today. And I think there will be some DC news coming out. I think that once the DCU gets really up and running with the Creature Commandos, and obviously Penguin is coming out soon, we'll have a lot to talk about with DC, but for now, relatively quiet on that front, but a lot of interesting Marvel news that has been coming out over the last week or so. So if you haven't subscribed, make sure to do so. Comment down below with what you think about these topics, and if you're listening on Spotify, thank you so much. Make sure to leave a rating. Let me know what you think about the podcast in its audio format. I would love to hear that as well. All right, guys, we have a lot to discuss today, and so I don't want to delay any longer. Let's get into it with the first topic. The first topic I wanted to discuss today is something that was more recent, relatively recent, and that is the return of a character to the MCU that, well, on the one hand, I think we all sort of expected this to be happening, but on the other hand, it is a little bit surprising as well, and I'll go into the reasons why I think this is a good idea and why I think this is a bad idea. So one of the forgotten films of the MCU, one of the films that not a lot of people talk about anymore, is Avengers Age of Ultron. It came out in 2015. It was the follow-up, obviously, to one of the most successful MCU films in many aspects, right? Financially successfully, critically as well. Avengers, 2012's Avengers. It was really the proof of concept to show that the MCU could thrive in a world where superhero films were finally getting their footing, especially leading the way with films like Iron Man and The Dark Knight and whatnot. So first Avengers, and then, there was going to be a sequel. Phase 2 was off, and it was a little rocky, but, for the most part, it had some very interesting characters and interesting films. Captain America Winter Soldier, Guardians of the Galaxy, who were not in that Avengers film. But, if you're going to make a sequel to the Avengers, Avengers, then obviously it's going to, it's going to go big, and the villain was going to be Ultron. Now, a lot of people have since, I feel like the opinions have changed on Avengers Age of Ultron in the years since, at least from what I've been hearing from people. I think there are those who maybe think the film is a little mid or a little, less interesting than they originally thought, which I think is totally fine, totally fair. But I think there are a lot of people also that I've been talking to who have gained a little bit of an appreciation for the film as the years have gone by. And I am actually one of those people. I did an Infinity Saga rewatch series a while ago where I talked about Avengers Age of Ultron, and I mentioned, and this was a while ago admittedly, but still I think a lot of the thoughts remain consistent on my front, that every time you watch the film, it's a kind of a realization of, especially if you've seen the first Avengers recently before Age of Ultron, that this isn't quite the film that the first Avengers is. There's a lot of things that you kind of wish were a little better. It feels almost like a lighter version of the first Avengers. That being said, it's a very fun film. I think that it got a lot of flack at the time for just not being as good as the first Avengers, but I don't think that that's really the film's biggest problem. One of the things that I've always praised about the film is that while the character was maybe not written the best, and by written I mean more so the character arc and the character progression and maybe some of the quips, the overly quippiness of the character, I think Ultron honestly is one of the better villains of the MCU. I don't say that in terms of, again, like I said, just pure writing of a character. He doesn't have a Thanos level character arc, but you kind of understand where he's coming from. It's one of those, classic AI gone rogue kind of things. But again, you see this idea of Ultron seeing what's wrong with the Avengers, what's wrong with the world, and thinking that the only way to fix all of it is to get rid of the Avengers. I think that is a very interesting take on artificial intelligence. I just think that it was condensed so much into a movie that you weren't really able to get too far into it, for a character as complex as Ultron, as we would have liked. Well, it looks like that is all about to change, because Ultron will be making his return into the live-action MCU in probably 2026, as it is confirmed now that Ultron, when I say confirmed, it's not been confirmed by Marvel or Disney, but it's been confirmed by the major outlets that Ultron will return in the Vision series, and James Spader will return to the role. A couple things here that I wanted to talk about. First of all, it is interesting because the signs have been there maybe a little bit with Ultron having such a big presence in the What If series, and I know that What If is not really seen as a part of the MCU, or it's seen as a part of the MCU, but it's not really, MCU proper, if you will. But Ultron had a really big part in that series, and honestly, while there's not a lot that I love about What If, there are a few episodes and a few characters that I enjoy in What If. Ultron, Infinity Ultron, or whatever they're going to call it, was actually one of my favorite parts, because that was really Ultron unleashed and showing the full potential of what that character could be. Ultron has always been just a really cool character. There's something so inherently cool about a robot that, kind of is a philosophizing a robot that can really match up to the Avengers in that regard. So that was always, seeing that in What If was always a really point of big interest for me as well. So the groundwork is being laid, but in the back of my mind, I kind of thought, let's move on to other characters. I think there are other ways to explore. Let's just try to branch out a little bit. But I also thought, and I always knew that it was a possibility that Ultron could come back into the MCU, because it's a character that, you can say all we want that he died in Avengers Age of Ultron. The fact of the matter is he's a robot. He's an artificial intelligence. He's basically in the internet. He can come back in pretty much any form and kind of wreak havoc on the MCU. So on the one hand, I'm happy about this, because I think that more James Spader as Ultron is always a good thing. And, I think that we haven't even begun to scratch the potential of this character, and I'm very excited to see where he goes from here. On the other hand, I think the prospect of reviving yet another legacy MCU character and not, just bringing him back, it makes me wonder what the point of this is here in this Vision series, because we've been doing this a lot, right? We've been really digging deep into the well of MCU characters and bringing characters back, like the Abomination, for example, that, we thought that we'd never see again. And not that people would have been happy to never see Abomination again, but just as an example, I don't think that if they never brought him back, it would have been, a massive deal. Perhaps Ultron is a little bit different, because Ultron is much more popular than a character like Abomination, but still, I do I just wonder what the slippery slope of this is, I suppose. Because yes, Ultron is a character that you can kind of do this with and get away with it because, it's artificial intelligence. He can come back in any form. That being said, how are you going to build in stakes where you actually can beat Ultron when he is like this, right? It seems a little bit strange that they're going in that direction, because it really kind of undermines the fact that how can you beat a character like that. A couple other interesting things of note, though. I don't believe in the Hollywood Reporter article where this was announced that they said that Ultron is going to be the villain of the show, which is interesting because perhaps he could be a kind of rogue agent, as a Zemo character kind of was in The Falcon and the Winter Soldier. The other couple interesting things here is that, one, the Vision series is on track to be filming in early 2025, so it really looks like this is going to be the next series after Wonder Man is done filming, which I think is kind of an interesting thing. And the other interesting note, which I don't know if it's a flourish from the writer of the article or if this is actually what is intended by Marvel, but this writer wrote that this is meant to be the third in a trilogy of series, starting with WandaVision, then Agatha All Along, which is coming out in just over a month, I think, or just under a month, and then it's going to be Vision. And, it was originally called Vision Quest. I don't know what it's being called now, but I think that that's actually kind of an interesting way to look at that. I don't know if this is an interpretive thing, like the author of the article is saying, it just seems like there are three projects here that all seem related to one another, or if this is actually what Marvel had always intended, and this person has inside information on that. Yeah, this is a trilogy in a sense that these three series are sort of serving as three parts of one story focusing on different characters. It's no secret that I love Paul Bettany in the role of Vision. Vision is one of my favorite characters in the MCU. I do think that, especially with this White Vision, there are some interesting avenues to take, but I also, want to caution and hope that they're not just going to, again, with Vision and with Ultron, they're not just bringing characters back for the sake of bringing popular characters back, because I think that could be a little bit detrimental to an MCU that's already on weaker ground. But I ask you guys, what do you think about Vision, and what do you think about the show? What do you think about the concept that, what the rumors that have been going on? Do you think that, like myself, that a Young Avengers kind of team could be related to this series? Let me know in the comments down below. And also, obviously, let me know what you think about James Spader returning as Ultron. Again, always good to have more James Spader, always good to have more Ultron, just hoping that the story is able to justify what's going on here. All right, let's move on to the next topic. And the next topic isn't so much of a confirmed thing, but I think more just something that's been speculated, but I wanted to touch on because I think it's kind of interesting. So it seems like Marvel has been slowly learning the lessons that they needed to learn from their early, let's say, television failures. And I say failures lightly. It's not like, every single show that they've done has been a disaster. But obviously, we've seen the growing pains of a studio that's really not known how to make proper television shows. And so we've gotten shows such as Secret Invasion. We've gotten shows like a She-Hulk or whatever that perhaps were really lackluster and not living up to expectations. Even a Loki season 1, for me personally, was disappointing because it just didn't feel like it was a complete show, and it just felt more setup-y for the rest of the MCU. Now, and we'll talk about Loki season 1 and what season 2 did right to fix it in just a second. But Marvel has made a lot of mistakes when it comes to their television. I think they're finally beginning to learn with it. Daredevil Born Again looks like a brilliant step in the right direction. I think they finally understand you need showrunners, you need proper people behind the helm, you need storytelling that feels complete and not just setting up other things. And so it's really interesting to see how the MCU moves forward with their television shows from here. That being said, there are a couple shows that were, one was received kind of tepidly, and the other was, actually pretty well received by critics and fans alike. That doesn't mean that this show doesn't have its problems, but I think that the second show also had a lot of potential moving forward. So those two shows being Moon Knight and Miss Marvel. But these shows were really under the problem of the old Disney regime, where you just have to pump out content as fast as possible, as much as possible, and so you were digging deep into the archives. And I'm not saying that these aren't important characters. I'm just saying that I think normally, perhaps we would have gotten a Miss Marvel movie instead with, Captain Marvel. Like, we would have gotten a movie like The Marvels first, and then dove into Miss Marvel as a character herself, and who knows about Moon Knight as a character. It just kind of feels like we're reaching for as many side characters as we possibly could. That being said, these shows presented interesting concepts, and now that Marvel is sort of beginning to fix their television division, I wonder what this will bode for the future. And so with that, there were some rumors coming out over the past little bit that Marvel is looking to do a Moon Knight season 2 and a Miss Marvel season 2. So what this segment of the podcast is not me saying, and not me wanting to talk about the fact that there's confirmation that Moon Knight season 2 is happening and Miss Marvel season 2 is happening. That's not at all what I'm trying to say, because these are just rumors still so far. And, this isn't a news segment in this particular instance, so much as it is just me wanting to take the opportunity to talk about what a Moon Knight season 2 would look like and what a Miss Marvel season 2 would look like. Because I think that these are both characters that have immense potential in the MCU, and it's really just not been realized yet. So what I thought I'd do is go through both Moon Knight, and Miss Marvel, and go through 4 separate points on what I hope and what I expect to happen for each respective season 2, if they do in fact happen. Because I think, again, with the actors that they got, with the characters themselves, there is just so much potential to expand the universe, expand these characters, and give a satisfying story as well. So let's start out with Moon Knight, a show that if you watch my recent Phase 4 rewatch, you'll know that I wasn't super thrilled by. I think that it had its moments for sure, but it wasn't my favorite show, and it definitely left a lot to be desired at the end. So here's what I would do to here's what I would do, or here's what I would want from a season 2 storyline and season 2 that revolves around Moon Knight. The first thing is that I would love to see Jake Lockley as the villain. This is something that I talked about in my video where I had where I rewrote Phase 4 of the MCU, and where I was talking about all the things that I wanted to have happen with these new projects. And one of the things that I talked about is having Jake Lockley be the villain, because I think that was sort of the semi-intention of the end of Moon Knight, but they really never realized it, and they just kind of left it as a cliffhanger, which I think is kind of lame. So I think that Jake Lockley being that villainous personality is something that we should definitely be looking at here as we go along. Now, that kind of leads me to my second point here, which is, look, I mean, Moon Knight Season 1, to me personally, it wasn't as incomplete as Loki Season 1 was, but it still had a lot of things that, kind of felt like they just set them up and then they didn't really want to pay them off, including the Jake Lockley twist at the end. So here's what I would want. Just given the Moon Knight Season 1 that we actually did have. Let's follow the template of Loki Season 2. Because, let's be honest, right? Loki Season 2 is essentially Loki Season 1 Part 2. It's not actually a Season 2. You could put those 2 seasons back to back and you wouldn't notice a single thing. It would be basically one fine, if not, good season of television, and you just wouldn't notice. And if someone told you, hey, they released these 2 seasons, the first 6 episodes and the second 6 episodes separately, and they called them separate seasons, you might be a little bit confused, right? And so what I'm hoping is that Moon Knight Season 2 can really pick up where the first season left off with Jake Lockley, and just finish the story that was being told, right? Because I think I think that would just go a long way to really helping this character feel more complete in the MCU proper. So those are my first 2 points, just really, dealing with Jake Lockley, and then, following the formula that Loki Season 2 kind of set out, I think somewhat successfully, actually. And then the third thing is I would, really love to see other characters in there. I think that let's start building Moon Knight up to a team, because look, I think it's fine to have these MCU characters more isolated in their own little pockets, their own little corners. Doesn't mean that they should just be completely isolated, right? I think that, let's have... I've been championing Midnight Suns for a long time, because it would really bring together a lot of characters that we haven't been talking about, a lot of characters we haven't seen in the MCU in a long time. And I would just really love to see characters like Man-Thing and Blade and whatever. But even so, maybe it's not Midnight Suns, maybe it's Dark Avengers, maybe it's just regular Avengers. Let's just start having him build towards something other than just him on his own adventures, right? I think that would be really fun. And the fourth thing is just, I think, something that's a little bit more obvious here. It's one of the big strengths of the first season of Moon Knight, and it's something where if you did do season 2 of Moon Knight, I think this is the only reason that you would do a second season of Moon Knight, and that is to dig into Oscar Isaac and his talents, because Oscar Isaac is just a tremendous actor. There are so few actors that can embody characters as well as Oscar Isaac, and I think it's just such a tremendous testament to who he is and how good of an actor that he is. I really think that, look, if you're going to do this, you're going to do this right. And you're going to bring back Oscar Isaac, and you're going to make sure that it's worth every single penny that you spend on this actor, because he is just phenomenal. I think that, not to say that he was wasted in season 1, but I think that, I think that there was a lot more that could have been done with that character if we had really taken the time to have written a really robust story. And so I think especially leaning into the elements that worked in episode 5 of season 1, for example, the one where he goes through his memories and his trauma, I think that's the Oscar Isaac that we really need to dig into here in this potential second season of Moon Knight. Speaking of potential second seasons, so let's talk about Ms. Marvel. And it's sort of a similar thing here, right? But I think that there are a lot of things that I deal with, moving forward with a second season of Ms. Marvel, now that she's established in the MCU. It's a little bit different than Moon Knight because she is actually in the MCU. Well, not that Moon Knight isn't in the MCU, but she is interconnected into the MCU. There are things that have happened to this character that place her firmly in the crosshairs of those who would be tackling other characters in the MCU and the other Avengers. And so it's a little bit different. But at the same time, what I also want to do is just like, with my second season of Moon Knight predictions and expectations, would love to keep it rooted in what we got in season 1 and her appearance in the Marvels, and really push this character forward to new heights. So the first thing that I would like to do in a season 2 is just keep it rooted in her friends and family. It doesn't have to be in Jersey, although I would love for it to be in Jersey, but let's bring back Bruno, let's bring back Nakia, and let's just really, dig into the family aspects, because those were the best things about the first season, was the family. I think that if you continue to make sure that the family is the core emotion of this series and of this character, then you're going to go a long way to making it successful. And we saw that a bit in the Marvels, a film that, wasn't the best film in the MCU, but definitely had its bright spots with Kamala Khan and with her family. Second thing is that, yes, let's explore the Bengals, because the Bengals are interesting, if not a little bit confusing, up until this point. And I want to explore them. I want to see, what they're made out of, what the powers actually do, interdimensional traveling, time traveling. I mean, you don't have to touch on all of these different things, but I think that there is something to be said about, really working with what we've been given in the first season and just trying to give us a little bit more of an explanation as to what's going on in that regard. So I think that's going to be something that will hopefully be very helpful as well. Third thing is just kind of like Moon Knight, but Moon Knight was a little bit different, like I said, because he hasn't been a part of the main adventures of the MCU, whatever that means at this point. But let's explore the ramifications of her adventures, because she was in space. She saw somebody go through a rift in dimensions and exit the multiverse in a different place. Let's explore what that means now that she's kind of grounded in Jersey City. It can almost be like a Spider-Man Homecoming situation where Peter Parker went to Berlin, and then he kind of had to go back home to high school, and I think that is something that we should definitely be dealing with and definitely be seeing with a character like Kamala Khan, who is so eager to just make the best impression and be the best version of herself. I think that is something that is worth exploring as well. And finally, the last thing I want to see here is that I want to see her grow and mature as a character, which is not to say that she, the character of Kamala Khan isn't mature, but what we love about her is this, sort of giddy, childish energy, and I think that we should definitely keep that. But at the same time, like I've been talking about, this is a character who has gone through things now, right? She's been to space, she's seen a lot of things that no high school, student would be, I think, mentally capable of handling. But I think that now that she's gone through these things, and she has obviously way more fortitude than any regular human being, we want to see what this does to her. We want to see how this affects her, how this makes her see the world differently. Maybe it doesn't make her see the world differently, and how it reshapes her perspective as well. I think that is a very important point moving forward. So yeah, I think those are the 4 things each for both Moon Knight and Ms. Marvel that I would be really excited to see for a potential second season. Again, I think these are 2 characters that have not necessarily been wasted, but, we haven't seen enough of them. And I definitely like to see 2 more seasons, one from Moon Knight and one from Ms. Marvel, if we can get them. Because, again, I think that these are characters with such raw potential, especially with the actors portraying them as well. So let me know in the comments down below, what do you hope for in a Moon Knight Season 2? What do you hope for in a Miss Marvel Season 2? And hopefully we'll get them, and hopefully they will be as amazing as we want. All right, guys, let's move on to this topic here, which is, something that has been going around recently and something that I just wanted to dig into and give my thoughts on because I think it's super interesting. So Robert Downey Jr., for those of you who don't know, has returned to the MCU. Not necessarily now. I mean, he hasn't appeared in anything since Avengers Endgame, but he is returning to the MCU as Dr. Victor Von Doom. Now, one of the things that we haven't really gotten insights into is why this happened. What motivated Robert Downey Jr. to come back? And it looks like we won't know the very specific answers, but he did some interviews recently and he gave some quotes and he talked a little bit about his thought process and the process of bringing himself back to the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And I wanted to just, let's do a little bit of reading here, a little more reading than we usually do on the channel. And I want to read out some paragraphs here, some quotes that I think will help explain what he was thinking about and how he was thinking about this decision to come back to Marvel. So there are two big quotes that I want to read here, and then we'll kind of talk about what they mean. So let's look at this first quote, look at the second quote, talk about it, and then we will kind of give some overall thoughts. First of all, he says here, quote, "I had this instinct that I wanted to go to Bob Iger, and I had an idea outside of the cinematic universe for how I could be of service to what's going on in the theme parks," Downey explained. "My wife, Susan, and I were sitting down with Feige, and he said, it just keeps occurring to me that if you were to come back, ... And Susan was like, wait, come back as what?" So here's what's interesting. First of all, what he talked about in this interview is that he and Kevin Feige have been maintaining a lot of contact. He and Kevin Feige have been, kind of close, and he's admitted that he's, close with Kevin Feige. I think he talks to Bob Iger somewhat. He's close with these people. They know him. It's not like he just completely pieced out and that was it for Robert Downey Jr. in the MCU. It looked like he was genuinely trying to do something in the theme parks, and it wasn't just like he wanted nothing to do with Marvel as soon as he was done with his role as Iron Man. So it's also interesting to hear that Kevin Feige, as early as whenever this meeting took place, which I have to imagine is maybe a year or so ago, even a few, at the very least a few months ago, it's interesting that Kevin Feige himself was thinking, okay, maybe there is some avenue that Robert Downey Jr. can come back as Iron Man. Or maybe just come back as in general, right? Like, I think it's interesting that, he says his wife was completely off guard, but Feige was already thinking about what is a good way for you to come back to the MCU. So that's also really interesting when we're laying the groundwork right there. So again, just laying the groundwork for the context of why he was meeting with Kevin Feige and what was going on there in the beginning. Just to be clear, not that I think Robert Downey Jr. is lying to any of us, but these are things that obviously he can say, but things could have been, different, or things he might not be talking about all the details. He might be omitting certain things. So I just wanted to keep that in mind that, maybe, in the back of his mind, he also was talking, or he was thinking he wanted to come back, and maybe he had even talked to Feige before this particular meeting about the parks or whatever. So just wanted to clarify. He seems like a pretty honest guy in these interviews, especially post MCU, I guess, phase 1, chapter 1 of his MCU career as Iron Man, where he was very tight-lipped about all the spoilers and whatnot. But, you never know, right? You never know. It's this second quote here that I want to talk about. And there's more in this interview. You can check it out in other articles. But it's the second quote here that I wanted to focus on, as he says, quote, Kevin said, "How can we not go backwards? How can we not disappoint expectations?" And by the way, this is me talking. This is, now them really contemplating what does a return to the MCU look like. So just wanted to clarify that. Okay, let's get back to the quote. Quote, "How can we continue to beat expectations?" And he brought up Victor Von Doom. And I looked into this character and I was like, wow. Later on, Kevin, he goes, "Let's get Victor Von Doom right." So this is interesting because I think that it's this kind of idea of, Kevin Feige presenting him with this option of, okay, how do we come back to the MCU in a way that feels respectful, that feels like it's not just looking back into the past, but also looking forward into the future and finding this right future movement for you as an actor and also for this character that we want to bring to life. Because it looked like, to me, right, that, I'm sure that there were options that were brought about that, said, hey, maybe we do Iron Man again. Maybe we do bring you back. But they've all been very clear and specific in saying that we are not going to just bring Iron Man back for the sake of bringing Iron Man back. And so I think that, look, it's a very delicate conversation, obviously, that you have to have. And I think that Kevin Feige was asking the right questions. How can we not go backwards? How can we not disappoint expectations? How can we continue to beat expectations? And while he doesn't go into specifics, and first of all, he says Victor Von Doom. So let's be clear, this is Victor Von Doom. He doesn't say Tony Stark variant. He doesn't say Victor. He doesn't say Doom. He says Victor Von Doom. That's his actual name, right? That's his given name. Because Doctor Doom is the character's, sort of Latvian supervillain title. But Victor Von Doom is his actual name. So that is the character. In whatever capacity, you can check out other videos on the YouTube channel. For example, I talk about, why Robert Downey Jr.'s return is so perfect, or it could be so perfect. And I talk about all the reasons and all the explanations of what he could be doing in the MCU. But yeah, I think that, he's playing Victor Von Doom. Who knows what he was pitched by Kevin Feige? Who knows what they talked about? But it seemed like they got really excited about this idea that's moving forward, and that's really what I wanted to focus on here. Is because this is an actor who doesn't just do things for the sake of doing things. He's rich beyond compare. He has so much money. And, maybe he's doing, obviously he's getting a huge chunk of money for these movies as well. But again, I just happen to think, and I hope that I'm right about this, that it's not just about, money or doing another Avengers movie just because he's bored, but because he really found an idea. And this article mentions he's an Oscar winner now, right? He can do whatever he wants. And what is he doing? He's coming back to the MCU as Doctor Doom. So, I think that this really speaks to the idea that Robert Downey Jr. saw a great idea here, one that wouldn't tarnish his legacy, one that wouldn't tarnish the legacy of Marvel. And he said, let's go for it. And for me, while I still have a lot of questions about how they're going to pull this off, I have a lot of questions about what Victor Von Doom is going to look like in this next iteration. I also have faith that they are really looking at this holistically. They're looking at this in a way that makes sense to them and doesn't ruin the legacy of Tony Stark, and I think that is a good thing. So let me know in the comments down below what you think about Robert Downey Jr.'s quotes as he returns to the MCU as Victor Von Doom, and let me know what you think about that. And with all that out of the way, let's get to our final segment, and this is surely not going to be a controversial one at all, so let's talk about the Acolyte. And I hate that I have to do this, but I have to do this because every time I talk about the Acolyte, and I think every time anybody talks about the Acolyte, there are those who want to just post comments that are hateful or post, thoughts that are disrespectful to others for the sake of being disrespectful and for no other good reason. Look, I'm not here to tell you should like the Acolyte. I'm not here to tell you should dislike the Acolyte. I have my own thoughts on the show. That's really not what this video is about. I know that, we're going to talk about why the Acolyte was canceled, right? But this segment of the podcast is really not meant to be one of negativity inherently. We're going to be talking about some things that are probably going to be negative to some people or some members of the audience. But again, I think that, look, let's not pretend that this is a topic that doesn't, garner some negativity just by the way that it's spoken about, right? And so I think that I think a couple of things to keep in mind here. Let's all be really careful about separating the fact that we dislike a show or we like a show, and also then separating that out from we dislike a person for their views on that show, and we like people for having similar views to us. Let's all really make sure to have a respectful conversation about this in the comments, because again, I want to foster that conversation. I don't care if you have a different opinion about the Acolyte than I do. I want to talk about it with you. But what I don't want, because I did see this in previous videos about the Acolyte, is people just saying, that's a stupid take, you're stupid for having this idea, how dare you, etc., etc. This is not the place for that. And anyways, this isn't even a video that's talking about my personal thoughts on the Acolyte. I'll probably mention them a couple times, but this is really just me talking about the general story, the general narrative of why the Acolyte was canceled and what that means for Star Wars. So I hope that that's all cleared away, and not to be redundant, but that's made clear. With that out of the way, the Acolyte has indeed been canceled. It was, I suppose, set up for a season 2. It's a little unclear to me that, whether or not the creator Leslie Headland had been promised a season 2 or just went into the season 1 thinking that she was going to make a season 2, because, there was a lot of talk about her setting up things for season 2, and she was, trying to lay the groundwork for things that had occurred at the end of season 1. And I suppose that we'll do a spoiler alert for The Acolyte. That's been out for a couple months now. So if you haven't seen it yet, then we'll be talking about some things at the end of season 1. But things like Darth Plagueis and things like, now that there are Sith running around, what's going to happen to the galaxy, obviously Yoda. So it's a little unclear if Leslie Headland, planned this in advance and really thought, I'm just going to force their hand, whether they promised her a season 2, but she's not getting one. What is the reason behind this? Well, it's actually not as complicated as you might think, according to these reports, because essentially it just had to do, not just, but it mainly had to do with viewership. Now, viewership is a direct result of other things that we'll talk about in just a second, but just to get the raw numbers out there, the first episode of The Acolyte had 4.8 million views, I believe, on day 1, but then it rose to about 11 million views. That being said, each subsequent episode, I believe, maybe it peaked and valleyed a little bit, but by the time you got to the finale, the show had lost viewership. It just simply was not being watched by people anymore. This is obviously, like I said, a symptom of other things, mainly including divisiveness, for sure. This show is incredibly divisive, and those who do not like it with a passion. Also, I think that it just wasn't good enough. Even those people who like the show a lot, I think that you wouldn't find many people, and when I say it's not good enough, I mean that, generally, right? Not for me personally, but for people in general, it wasn't good enough to transcend the level of an Andor or Mandalorian season 1, where everyone was talking about how amazing that last episode was. It wasn't good enough to appease everyday viewers. And I mean this in an aggregate, right? I'm not saying it's not good enough for you. That's not what I'm saying at all. If you love The Acolyte, that's great. It can be, it can be good enough for you. But I think good enough to warrant a season 2 means that everyone had to be talking about it. This had to be a show where it really revived faith in the Disney brand and in the in the Star Wars brand. And this show just wasn't it. It wasn't good enough in the aggregate. And that's the problem, because that means that it wasn't good enough for it wasn't transcending to the level of a show in which everyone's talking about it, in which there are, there's a lot of critics that are talking about it, a lot of fans talking about it. It just wasn't getting to that level, and therefore Disney pulled the plug on it. Now, I personally hope that this doesn't mean we're going to see the last of the older times, the High Republic, and perhaps even eventually the Old Republic seen in Star Wars. I really hope that is not the case, because I think that stories told around different time periods in Star Wars is a really good thing. Look, my problems with The Acolyte were not the time period at all, for what it's worth. It's not the lore, for what it's worth. It's a lot of other things. But at the end of the day, I think that exploring a time period where the Sith are on the rise, which is really not what The Acolyte was actually about. It was more about just this random twin and, the master of one of the twins, and then now the other twin. I don't know. It's kind of weird and confusing, but that's really what The Acolyte ended up being about, when it was setting up things that I think we all wanted to see, like Darth Plagueis, for example. And so I think that it's hard, because this is a classic case of a creator who really thought and was really banking on the fact that this series would be successful enough that it would get a season 2. Unfortunately, it did not. Doesn't mean that there aren't people who don't like the show or who do like the show, because there are plenty of people who like the show, and in fact there are people who love the show, right? When I say good enough, I don't mean as an art piece it's not good enough for you. I mean that in the aggregate, with so many people, it's almost like Rotten Tomatoes, right? There aren't enough people who loved the show enough to warrant a season 2, and the viewership numbers back that up. I'm not making a normative claim. I'm not saying it should or shouldn't have a season 2. In my opinion, would I like to see a season 2? I wouldn't be opposed to it, although I wouldn't be personally supporting it. But that being said, The Acolyte was canceled because it just wasn't enough to revive Star Wars. And I'm not saying that it needed to be the next Citizen Kane. I'm not saying it needed to be the next Godfather. But when you have a show like The Acolyte, where only a handful of people, and I'm not saying this to be disparaging. I think that, it's great that people like The Acolyte, but it's not really, it's not a huge majority, if at all a majority. I think it's just a group of people who said, yeah, this is a great show. It's a good show for me. But I think that that's not enough for Disney to say, okay, we're going to take some of the interesting ideas, obviously Darth Plagueis being one of them, which, yeah, would I love to see a Darth Plagueis series? Of course I would. Probably even, would love to see it based on that book that was written about Darth Plagueis and Emperor Palpatine. That's great. But that wasn't what we got in season 1. And so why would I believe that that's what we're going to get in season 2? I can hope that that's what we're going to get in season 2. But do I know it for sure? No, absolutely not. And so look, at the end of the day, Star Wars is still, I mean, the disappointing thing about all of this is that Star Wars is still in a rehabilitation phase, right? We're going to have The Mandalorian and Grogu coming out. Hopefully that'll restore some good faith in Star Wars. But I'm hoping that, you know, with what this will teach Disney and this will continue to teach Lucasfilm is that there needs to be a real purpose behind just the season that you're writing, right? This is not something where you're automatically guaranteed a season 2 just because you asked for it. And it's not even kind of an MCU kind of thing where, you know, you can kind of tank a season 1 because there's so much goodwill, and then you kind of say, not tank a season 1, but just, you know, create a season that's not really incomplete, or that's not really complete, and then just, you know, assume, oh, we're going to get, you know, a season 2, and then we're going to finish out the story. That's not how this works. I think time and time again, we've seen filmmakers do this, you know, pull this tactic, and it doesn't work, right? I just wish that if we're going to do Plagueis, we were going to do Plagueis, and we did it in the second to last episode in one of the last scenes, and I think that was really to the detriment of this show. So there are a whole host of reasons for the Acolyte being canceled, but I think at the end of the day, it just could not justify its own existence for existence of a season 2, because it just wasn't transcending to that level, you know, of being a show that was beloved by so many people that you just simply couldn't ignore it and make a season 2. Ahsoka, by the way, is rumored to be getting a season 2, or it's in development of a season 2. That I think is a little different, just because I think that there are enough people who are somewhat interested, and obviously this is built off the backs of a highly successful animated series in the Clone Wars and Rebels, and so I think that has, you know, it has that going for it. But we'll have to see about Ahsoka season 2. Anyways, we're here to talk about the Acolyte, and I want to know from you guys, what do you think about the Acolyte being canceled? Do you think that it deserved to be canceled? Do you want to see a season 2? Are you one of the people who think that it should get a season 2? Let me know in the comments down below. And with that, guys, that will do it for me for today for Access Blockbusters Pod episode 37. Thank you guys so much for joining. Make sure to leave a like if you are watching on YouTube, and comment down below with your thoughts about any of these topics, whether it be the Acolyte, whether it be Robert Downey Jr., whether it be Moon Knight or Miss Marvel, whether it be Ultron returning to the MCU. Like I do with all these podcast episodes, the full one will be coming out over the weekend, and then we will be releasing clips throughout the week as well. Thank you guys so much for joining me, and I will see you guys in the next one.